My next guest is a man who needs very little introduction. John Bercow was the formidable former Speaker of the House of Commons for 10 years, from 2009 to 2019. He oversaw one of the most interesting, but also one of the most fiery and divisive periods in British politics over Brexit. He was also the MP for Buckingham, and he's also a close friend of Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, which is very topical given everything that's happening. John, welcome to Times Radio.
Ayesha, it's a delight to speak to you, and thank you for having me on your programme.
Absolute pleasure. I want to begin with the question that a number of our listeners have sent in, which is, how do you think our British Parliament would have coped with the attempts to storm it as we have seen in Capitol Hill?
Well, it's never a good idea to be glib or complacent, and we, of course, have had very real threats to our security in the British Parliament, Ayesha, as you and your listeners can testify. I think one thing I can say with confidence is that if we had been subjected to an assault by a body of nationalist stroke neo-Nazi stroke racist imposters, the police response would have been very much more robust than was the case in the United States. I think Joe Biden struck a chord with millions and millions and millions of people, not only in America but around the world, when he said only the other day, let's face it, if this had been Black Lives Matters protesters assailing the Capitol, it would have been dealt with very differently. So that, I think, is the most striking difference. Can I say that there wouldn't have been shortcomings or errors, or that might not have been delays? Nobody can say that. It's easy to be wise after the event, but it was a shocking fact that help was so late in the coming, and that very large numbers, Ayesha, of protesters seemed just to amble away from the Capitol after their invasion as and when they felt like it. That was wrong.
Absolutely. Now, you controversially at the time banned Donald Trump from speaking in Parliament in 2017 when you were Speaker. You attracted a lot of criticism for that decision, but I presume you feel pretty vindicated by it now.
Well, I have said for some time, Ayesha, that nothing has happened since February the 6th, 2017, when I said that, to cause me to change my mind. But a great many things have happened to reinforce me in the conviction, if I may say so, and I do, that I was right, that he hadn't earned the honour of an address to both Houses of Parliament. It was with an absurd and indecent haste that the government was rushing to invite him and to suck up to him and to say, come and speak to us. I say an indecent haste because he'd only just been elected a matter of weeks before. People pointed out that I was very happy to pay homage to and to host the visits with the Lord Speaker of President Obama. But there was a big difference. President Obama was a popular president in the UK and Europe. He was the first black president of the United States of America, to which I attach great significance, and I think others did. And thirdly, President Obama was invited to address us more than 2 years after he took office as president. So it was this desire to ingratiate ourselves with Donald Trump that I thought was inappropriate and borderline offensive. And it seemed to me particularly offensive also, Ayesha, in light of the fact not just that Trump had only just been elected, but that he'd been elected after a vicious and venomous and vitriolic campaign against his opponent, Hillary Clinton, that he had a track record of sexist behavior, and that in his campaign he had pledged to impose, let's face it, a crude racist ban on Muslims entering the United States. And so I did very explicitly, in my rather blunt way, say that I thought these were important considerations, and I certainly wasn't minded to invite him. You're right, there was some criticism, a lot of criticism, although, Ayesha, to be fair, I don't think this ever got much coverage in the British press, including in the Murdoch press, if I may say so. But the fact is that I had about 3,000 letters from members of the public, and they were 84% in my support and 16% against. So Yes, there was quite a hullabaloo about it and a furore, and people who'd always been my enemies and were looking to pick a fight chose to do so. But if you ask me, did I lose any sleep over it? The honest answer is no.
Did you lose much sleep over your time in as Speaker? Because you did have a very tumultuous time, and you mentioned the word enemies there, but you had a lot of enemies in Parliament, many from people who were from originally your own side. You were a Conservative MP, you were a leading figure in the Conservative Party, but lots of Conservatives turned against you, particularly over Brexit. Did you ever lose any sleep over that?
No, I didn't. I mean, I do understand. I'm not that lacking in emotional intelligence. I do understand that I had a lot of critics, and in particular to speak to and address your point, Ayesha, I understood and I understand that a good deal of that opposition came from people who resented my political journey. In other words, they sort of looked at me and either said to me or said to themselves or to their friends about me, he used to be with us and he isn't now, and I resent that. And I suppose that's, commonplace and not entirely surprising. People don't like someone that they think has become a turncoat, if you will. All I can say in response to that is, A, I didn't lose sleep over it, and B, I tried to do as Speaker the right thing. I've always said in interview after interview after interview and speech after speech after speech that no person can be judge in his or her own cause. Ultimately, it's not for me to say whether I was a good speaker or not. I did my best. I tried to keep the best and improve the rest. I tried to bring about and crystallize important reforms for the House to make the House operate better, to give backbenchers more chances, to ensure greater scrutiny, to make the workplace more modern and diverse and inclusive, to improve communication between ourselves and civil society, schools, colleges, universities, the Youth Parliament, and so on. But other people must decide whether they think I was a success as Speaker or not. All I can say to you, and you and I, Ayesha, have known each other a very long
We
time,
have.
is that I am authentic. I was the real deal. And I did, if I may say so, and I do say this, do what it said on the tin. When I stood for Speaker with terrific support from the Labour Party in particular, but members across the House, I had support from members from about 6 different political parties, I said, look, I want to be a modernising speaker. I want to be an innovating speaker. I want to be a reforming speaker. I don't want to be speaker simply so that I can say to my children, or one day, God willing, my grandchildren, in answer to the question, what did you do? Oh, I served as Speaker. I wasn't interested in holding the office simply for the purpose of saying I held the office. I wanted to try to leave the office of Speaker and the institution of Parliament in a better place than I found them. And again, that's for other people to judge whether I did. But I think if I were challenged about particular changes, I could point to a large number of changes that I made, either purely on my own initiative and according to my own discretion, or on the basis of collaboration with other members of Parliament, the House as a whole, and so on. And I do think at the end, we were operating much better in terms of holding ministerial feet to the fire, ensuring that government ministers were properly questioned, giving MPs the chance to put their point of view. And as I say, when I started as Speaker, Ayesha, I remember being absolutely horrified by the fact that we had a shooting gallery in Parliament where people could go pistol shooting if they wanted to do so, but there was no nursery that MPs or staff could pay for to broker a better work-life balance. Now, by the end, I'm very proud to say that we had an extremely thriving, successful, well-attended nursery, but the shooting gallery had been abolished due to lack of demand, and that seemed to be a much more satisfactory state of priorities in 21st century Britain.
I do remember that. And on the big issue of your time, your tenureship there, of course, was Brexit, and you mentioned about the American elections as being vicious and venomous. Well, I mean, I think that probably adequately describes the last 5 years of our, country's journey on Brexit, whatever side of the argument. Do you ever look back at your time as Speaker and have any regrets about how divisive the House of Commons became over Brexit, and the fact that much of the public were quite frustrated at what happened in Parliament, because it did look to the outside world that Parliament was trying to frustrate Brexit to a lot of people, and people took their cue from what was happening in Parliament. Parliament was so divided, the rest of the country continued to be so divided as well.
Well, I don't have regrets about Parliament doing what it thought was right and me making decisions of a procedural kind, Ayesha, from the chair, that gave MPs that opportunity. If you ask me, John, do you regret that? Do you think that was a mistake? Do you realise or accept that people saw that as an attempt to avoid or deny or prevent Brexit? No, I don't regret that, because I think that Parliament, frankly, didn't appear in 2017 from nowhere. Parliament appeared as a result of the general election, and the general election produced a hung Parliament. Let's face it, Theresa May didn't call an election in order to satisfy MPs. She called an election with the support of the House of Commons because she thought she could greatly increase her majority. And she not only didn't increase her majority, she lost her majority altogether. So the Parliament produced after the 2017 election was hung. That is to say, it was divided. It didn't have an overall majority. And that reflected the huge divisions in the country. So I certainly don't regret saying to the House, in effect, either directly by my words or by my decisions, you decide the course of Brexit. This is for you to decide. I don't have a vote unless there's a tie, and I exercised my vote once in 10 years and 4 months as Speaker, and no more than that. So all I was doing was trying to facilitate the House in a situation in which the Theresa May administration had lost its overall majority. So no, I don't regret that at all. And if people say, oh, well, wasn't Bercow being undemocratic? He was trying to thwart the will of the people. Well, sorry, what will of the people? What was the will of the people at that point?
There was a referendum. There had been a referendum.
There had been a referendum. You're absolutely right. There'd been a referendum in June 2016. And one of the things I found most striking, Ayesha, was that for months and months and months, indeed effectively for 2 years afterwards, until the summer of 2018, it was not even clear what Brexit meant so far as the government was concerned. It took the government 2 years to produce a white paper which set out the particulars, the direction, the intended
but without, I mean, John, forgive me for...
Surely I was entitled to say, well, the House has got to come to a view about this. What I do regret, I'll be honest about this, what I do regret is the tone. I do regret that the tone deteriorated and the level of abrasiveness and the number of ad hominem attacks increased, not just in the country, but in Parliament. And that, I think, is a pity, because Parliament at its best is able to have robust debate, but for its members to display and reveal respect for each other. And unfortunately, that seemed to dissipate towards the end. And there was a very angry, abrasive, intolerant and intimidating atmosphere. And you will recall colleagues like Paula Sheriff, but many other people as well, feeling genuinely threatened and intimidated. And of course, none of us is ever going to forget, you know, the most tragic expression of the anger in the country in the form of the murder of Joe Cox. Now, I hoped that in the aftermath of that, you know, there would be a more tolerant, a more respectful atmosphere in the House, but it never seemed to endure for very long. So I very much regret that. And if you ask me, did I make my own mistakes? Oh, I'm sure I did, because to err is human. But if you're asking me overall, do I have a fundamental regret about the way in which I went about the chairing of the Brexit debates? Absolutely not. And I remember saying to the government chief whip on one occasion when he bitterly complained about a procedural decision I'd made to select an amendment from Dominic Grieve. I remember saying to Julian Smith, the government chief whip, well, first of all, Julian, don't bang the table by my chair. Please don't bang the table. First of all, it's a threat to the wood, and secondly, it's very rude. And I said to him, and I simply say to you, Julian, if you don't like this amendment, your responsibility is to encourage your MPs to vote against it, but it's not my responsibility
Sure.
to protect the government from the absence of a majority. The government didn't have a majority. The government was in a
And John,
minority.
yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, in terms of, it's interesting to say about, you've defended your corner very ardently, as is your right. But it is interesting to hear about the tone, and I think that's something that politicians from all across the political spectrum would agree with you on. The tone in Parliament over Brexit became very, very toxic, and it became very aggressive. Do you ever regret, I suppose, sometimes the tone with which you maybe addressed some MPs? You were renowned for having quite a sharp tongue on occasion. Do you regret that?
Oh, I think now and again, I was probably too hard on somebody and probably not hard enough on somebody else. I mean, you can endlessly look back and think, could it have been done differently? Get out the microscope and look at every individual situation and ask, well, if I had my time again, might I have handled that slightly differently? I think we can all think of such examples.
What would your example be, John?
To be blemish free.
John, what would your?
I can't think. Well, witness that. It's not writ large in my mind, and I can't think off the top of my head of one particular example. And I think that most of the time, people took reproofs with very good grace. So I don't myself think that it was a big issue, to be honest. I really don't. And I can't recall anybody coming to see me and saying, I feel very badly put out. I think I was once pretty annoyed with Dominic Raab, for example, who is normally an extremely courteous member of the government, that, Dominic Raab came to the House and the relevant papers hadn't been distributed and members were up in arms about it. And I gave him pretty short shrift. And on another occasion, I think I was pretty robust with Sajid Javid. And maybe some people will say, oh, well, you were too harsh. I don't know. But I was trying to do the right thing. And I don't think that those people were shrinking violets, if I can put it that way.
I think it's
what I don't think we've had, and I know that this interview was supposed to be about the situation in the United States with a moment or two on Brexit. And in fact, it has transmogrified into an interview overwhelmingly about Brexit and my tenure as Speaker. But if I may be permitted just to go back to the situation in the United States, Ayesha, there I think, it has been a whole lot worse. And I hope that insofar as some British politicians have sought to import parts of the Trump playbook, they will from now on cease to do so, because although I was shocked and horrified and disgusted by the scenes on Wednesday where we all witnessed the storming of the Capitol, I wasn't, frankly, surprised. It seemed to me a logical culmination of a mindset and a manner exhibited throughout his presidency by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That is the behavior of somebody who, frankly, doesn't seek to solve problems but to exploit them. Who doesn't try to bring people together but to drive them apart.
And John,
who doesn't seek to address people's arguments but rather seeks to impugn their motives. And I don't think that's the sort of politics we want in the UK. We also need, if we're a democracy, a sort of politics in which people can not only rejoice in their victories but can graciously accept their defeats.
Absolutely.
I think the word gracious is not part of the limited lexicon of Mr. Donald Trump.
And John, in terms of everybody can look back at your decision from 2017. I repeat again, you are the person who said, I do not think Donald Trump merits an audience in the House of Commons. But many on your old party, the Conservatives, have very much cozied up to Donald Trump. You mentioned the eagerness with which Britain rushed to give him a state visit. Boris Johnson, very close to Michael Gove as well. Do you worry that senior Conservative politicians in the current administration have been too close to Donald Trump?
Yes. The short answer to your question is yes. I do worry about that. And I think that although they may not see it this way, they have some explaining to do. I thought it was a great pity for a start that Theresa May rushed to pay homage to Donald Trump. And, she seemed almost breathless in her quest to get him to come to this country and to speak here. And in the end, of course, this ingratiation with President Trump didn't long avail her in any case, because when, if you recall, she called him out quite rightly when Donald Trump retweeted filthy racist material of the racist neo-Nazi organization Britain First, he, as we know, notoriously thin-skinned, then turned on her. And her efforts on Brexit were fruitless and often maladroit.
Yeah.
But he then conducted a running commentary on those efforts, undermining her at every turn. So I think she probably realized that currying favor with him was ultimately ineffective and maybe even counterproductive. Michael Gove rushed to want to interview him. Jacob Rees-Mogg said that if he were an American, he would have voted for him. And not to be outdone, Boris Johnson, of course, said in 2018 that he thought that Donald Trump was a credible contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. And we all know the way in which Nigel Farage has fawned over Trump and almost proffered himself as a loyal and dependable lickspittle at every turn. So I think those attitudes are very unfortunate. This is somebody who, it seems to me, was very obviously never a democratic politician.
Yeah, of course.
And I suppose my attitude to him is that his attitude, it seems to me, is l'état, c'est moi. The state,
absolutely.
it's me.
Listen, we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to just ask you a couple of other quick questions. First of all, how did you mark the moment on the 11 o'clock on the 31st of December when Britain finally left the EU?
I think the answer to that is that my family and I were watching a film at home in an approach to New Year spirit. So was I celebrating the departure? No. And you'd think me a very, very peculiar, fickle and flaky character if I said to you that I was thinking, what a good thing. Look, I hope I'm wrong. I hope it proves not as bad as I fear, but I think it's the most colossal foreign policy blunder of the post-war period. As a result of leaving the EU, I think we're going to be poorer, we're going to be more insecure, and we're going to be less influential. So I haven't changed my mind about it, but of course I hope that it isn't the calamity that I fear it will be.
And final question, we've talked a bit about political culture, Trump, Dominic Cummings. There's been issues about Priti Patel and bullying. There were also allegations of bullying in your office. What's your reaction to that? Some of our listeners have been messaging.
I've always said that I've never bullied anyone, anywhere, in any way, at any time, and I stand by that view. Ultimately, other people will make their own judgment, but I've always tried to deal fairly and considerately with people. I had enormous support in the House, as I think you know, Ayesha, because I was elected and re-elected a total of 4 times, and I did serve longer than any other speaker in the post-war period. And I had fantastic relations with very, very, very large numbers of staff. I had a small number of relationships that didn't go so well, and it is a matter of recorded fact that I was constantly fighting for reform and for progress and for what I regarded as necessary change. And in some instances, I met very, very heavy resistance, in some cases strong institutional resistance to the pursuit of that necessary change. And, I dealt with it as best I could, but I can only reiterate that as far as I'm concerned, I've behaved in a decent and civilized way. And I was very struck by the fact that at the end of my tenure, significant numbers of people who'd worked for me over the years all wanted to come to the last Prime Minister's questions that I chaired. And I maintained very, very, very good and fruitful relations with the great majority of people with whom I worked during my tenure as Speaker. And I would like to say that I do think that speaks for itself.
Well, you've a lot of support from our listeners. There's a lot of people texting in saying, could you come back to sort things out? But also a couple of people messaging saying it's a shame you're not in the House of Lords. Do you feel sad that you didn't get your seat in the House of Lords?
Well, I would like to have gone to the Lords. There's no secret about that. It has been the General Convention, the overwhelming convention that the Speaker of the Commons has been sent to the House of Lords afterwards. But if you're asking me again, to come back to this question of one's nocturnal habits, do I sit awake at night thinking about it? The honest answer is no. I think I'm very fortunate. I was very privileged to have just over a decade, Ayesha, in post as Speaker, trying to do the right thing, trying to make a difference, trying to leave Parliament a better place than I found it. And I am now pursuing a different career, a sort of portfolio of different activities, and trying to enjoy myself and have time for my family and find for my family to see
And
me.
do you miss it, John?
And to pursue my pleasures.
Do you miss it?
No, I don't. I know that may seem strange because I was there for a long time, and you might think, well, surely you miss it, but actually I don't. I think that all good things come to an end, and from my point of view, it was a good thing. It was a most exhilarating journey as Speaker, but I had always resolved that the 2017 election would be my last. And once I saw that an election was approaching, I thought it sensible to say to the House, look, when the election comes, I won't be a candidate. I'll stand down as Speaker and as Member of Parliament. Some of your listeners may not know this, but I simply make the point that although it's not in any sense a legal requirement that when the Speaker steps down as Speaker, the Speaker leaves the Commons, it is very, very widely expected that that will happen.
Okay.
The House doesn't really want an ex-Speaker hanging around in the Commons. So I went with, I hope, dignity and good grace, with very fond memories, with no resentment. And if you ask me, do I miss it? No, I wish my successor, Speaker Lindsay Hoyle, very well in the hugely important challenges he has.
John.
And I still keep in touch with many of my colleagues, and I've got very, very fond memories.